Welcome to the latest episode of First Word in Sport. I have John Knight on again this morning, Monday morning, and we're going to look back on the US Masters over the weekend. Rory wins his sixth major, his second US Masters title, going back to back. Enjoy the golf, John?
Yeah, I think so. It was, I would say it was a good Masters. Looked like it was going to be maybe a classic Masters for 3.5 days. And then back nine just didn't quite get the fireworks that you'd hope for at Augusta. I think it all sort of was a little bit too easy for Rory in the end. But yeah, overall, I mean, Saturday was a good day, I thought. How about you? You enjoyed it?
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think it was just one of those. It was shaping up so nicely on sort of Sunday halfway through, and then no one could hold a putt really on that back nine. There was lots of close misses, and then we saw Rory under pressure, 17, 18, went obviously right with his approach shot on 17, missed it in a good place, I think, in hindsight. 18 went way right off the tee, and still, we always talk about very fine margins. He wins that tournament by one, and you can look back through rounds of golf and pick single shots out here, there, and everywhere. Very, very fine margins.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in the end, it was sort of the weight of the green jacket, wasn't it? And we spoke a little bit before the tournament about repeat winners at Augusta and how often they do tend to happen. And sure enough, like all the other guys like Rose, Henley had some good looks, and Cameron Young, and they couldn't get the ball in the hole on the back nine, and yeah, just maybe a little bit tentative with the putter in their hands, and Rory is this is the difference. He's won it last year, and he's just sort of playing with house money at that point, and it's just I think it's just a massive, massive psychological difference that there's just less pressure on him.
I mean, we did touch on it before that I didn't think there was any specific reason why you wouldn't get repeat winners here. Everything we see is it's a course that favours experience playing here. And I actually think one big thing for Rory was that he ran into his troubles early enough that it gave him time to recover. So, if he'd run into his issues very late on in the round, it may well have been tough to get back into it. But because he'd blown the lead pretty early on and he had that double bogey early, it almost relaxed him a little bit. The pressure was off him suddenly. No one was thinking, oh, this is someone who had a 6-shot lead going into the third round, and this is Rory's tournament to lose. It felt like he was just in a proper scrap, and honestly, the likes of Justin Rose, they almost hit the front too early.
Yeah, no, that is true about Rose especially. I mean, if you look at last year as a comparison, I mean, Rose finished like a train, and he was sort of playing the same way until the moment where he hit the front, and then it was just so clear that it all changed for him. Yeah, Rory's interesting. That I said before the tournament that I still wasn't convinced that he could putt well on the Augusta greens, and he decided to come out for 2 days and make me look like a complete idiot because he obviously just got up and down from everywhere and hold everything for 2 days. That certainly cooled off over the weekend, but the repeat winner thing. So there's repeat winners at Augusta, but then there's also like the back-to-back winner thing, which we questioned. Is there anything in that players don't often win sort of 2 years in a row? And I think we both agreed that that's just sort of randomness. There's no reason why not. And yeah, sure enough, that's what he did.
I thought, you know, I'm not always Rory's biggest fan, I would say, just generally. And I think some of that is that, the coverage we see in the UK certainly is very Rory heavy. And it always has been, you know, Rory this, Rory that. And, it gets a bit tiresome at times. And, it makes it tough watching at times, just in terms of how biased, Sky are with regard to Rory. But I do think in tournaments like this where he has had that 6-shot lead and he has come back to the field, he's had another lead, come back to the field. I think you should have to give him you have to give him a ton of credit for how he's handled the adversity this weekend. And in some respects, same applied to last year when he actually won this for the first time. overcome. It'd been very easy for him to crumble, and I think the big thing for me over the weekend was, I mean, you said you talked about his putting. I talked about driving the golf ball and how important it was around here. He made a mockery of that as well, John, if it makes you feel any better. He drove it abysmally those first couple of days, and it still feels a bit of an outlier to me that he managed to get to -12 after 36 holes, driving it as averagely as he was. He was obviously driving it long, but he'd hit less fairways than anyone, which I think is just incredible that he found himself in that position. And it looked like it was catching up with him in that third round. But I think where credit's due is he found something in that final round. He hit so many good drives in that yesterday when it really mattered. Bar 18.
Par 18, yeah. No, I think you're right. You do have to give credit to Rory because if you think down the years, the big criticism of Rory is he's got all this talent, and when everything goes his way, when it's his A game, when the course is perfect, when it's soft and all this stuff, then yeah, it's great and he wins a major. And then he's had so many opportunities where he's looked like he's in good shape and then he's messed it up. And so this is what people have, I guess, wanted from him, right? Is you show up and you don't have your A game, but you're able to kind of get it done somehow, and that's what he's done. And yeah, it was. I actually didn't watch the second round of his live. I was busy with work and stuff, and then I saw the score and I was like, wow, he must have played well. And then the Augusta app's fantastic, where you can go back and watch shot by shot. And I couldn't believe, like, every hole I watched all his birdies on the back nine, and he was just all over the place. He was missing fairways and then pitching out, but then he'd get the wedge up and down, and then he'd hold from off the green on 17, and it was an incredible run. The tournament was sort of really interesting because he had that big lead and his stats were just screaming like this guy's not playing well, which is, probably. I remember Paul Goydos once said in an interview that that's the worst situation to be in golf, sort of nerves wise, is when you're in the lead but you haven't been playing well and you're only in the lead because you've been sort of chipping and putting well. That's when you're most liable to sort of fall to pieces. And he blew a 6-shot lead on Saturday, right? And so at that point, I certainly didn't really fancy him going into Sunday. But then I think, he found something, right? And maybe again, that's just something about the confidence of being a previous winner of the Masters, is that you get there and you get those vibes from the last time you won, and you're able to find it.
I think what helps him a little bit is that what he was trying to find was obviously his driver. That's historically been his strongest club, and I think it's probably easier to find something with what you regard to be the strength of your game rather than let's say he had to try and find something putting. I think it'd been much harder for him if that's not your strongest part of your game. I think it's just that little bit harder to find something in that area. Whereas he knows, he's driven the ball, arguably better than anyone for the last sort of 20 years, all said and done. And, he showed it when it mattered.
Yeah, absolutely. And this and his short game, I think people underestimate how good Rory's short game is a little bit. And we mentioned before the tournament how it does tend to be a good separator at Augusta. And I mean, that's really what won him the tournament this week, just putting himself in position in the first place by the number of good recovery shots that he played. And I thought that chip on 17th on Sunday was just sort of emblematic of, that's something that you could easily mess up. You're chipping off a tight lie to a diabolical pin position where you really wanted to get that close because people weren't making that putt on 17. And he put it to what, like a foot and a half? I mean, that was quality, I think, under pressure. And it meant he went into 18 with a 2-shot lead, which, it was a shame because, for someone, you want action, don't you, on the 18th? And just that, with a 2-shot lead, it's just so hard to imagine, him making double. It would have had to have been a really unusual turn of events. So just to have to make bogey felt like it was always going to be doable.
And he obviously made a good up and down on 16 as well. Now, obviously, that chip isn't the hardest chip because you're hitting into just areas, and obviously the green sort of feeds it down towards the hole. But you're still having to be quite precise because if you miss your landing spot by a couple of feet, you'll end up on these greens 8-9 feet away. And one thing you don't have to worry about is the speed of the ball will run down to sort of pin high. Obviously, how far away from the hole it actually is something else. But he's always been a pretty good chipper, and it was interesting because we saw others struggle with it. You only have to look at Justin Rose on 12. 11 was a very difficult chip for him, up over the bunker, back towards the water to that tricky pin position on 11. And I actually thought he hit an all right chip. It was given the peril sort of behind the hole. It seemed like quite a sensible shot. But you see that duff chip by Rose on 12, and it's so easy to do here.
Yeah, exactly. They make it look easy until they're under the pressure of leading on the back nine, and then you see Rose. Yeah, that was tough. One thing I'll say about Rory and his driving, I mean, he obviously missed a lot of fairways in the first couple of days, but he's so long still that it's just incredible. You've got all these young guys that have come on tour, and there's this sort of new obsession with distance and training and all that stuff. And he's still knocking it like 15, 20 yards past most of them. And it's astonishing, really, for someone he's not a massive guy. He's just, I guess, got a combination of some sort of natural talent to hit it miles. And obviously he's worked on it as well with technique and stuff. But it's pretty impressive. And, of course, like Augusta, what it means is when you do hit some good ones, you're in fantastic position. And then there is luck involved, of course. I felt a bit sorry for Sam Burns in the second round. If you look at that drive that Sam Burns hit on the second, so he hits it a fairway right, similar to Rory's drive on 18, really. But Sam Burns' drive goes into a bush. He then has to take an unplayable, and he's still in a position where he's then sort of punching out. And so it is that luck factor in golf where you can hit two equally bad drives. One of them, you've got a sort of clear shot and you're getting it up around the green. And then the other one is, penalty stroke and then going out sideways. And so, Rory, he certainly did ride his luck with those drives in the first two rounds that they never, I don't think, got him into enormous trouble.
I mean, Cam Young, to be fair, he had some outrageous luck throughout, these couple of, certainly the last couple of days. And I do think, we talk about golf betting and how fine the margins are. People will be bored of me saying the words fine margins, whether it be golf, whether it be football, anything. But I think that's just the reality is that, Rory's won that tournament by a shot in the end. And, if you'd said to me after, when that tee shot's in the air on 18, that he's going to be able to get that into the front bunker, I wouldn't have believed you. It looks dead for all the world when it's in the air. And there's quite a lot of luck involved with some of these events. I don't think people, I think we've touched on it before where, it must have been great play by a player, or, we've done an amazing job punting on a player, we're geniuses for doing it. But the reality is there is an awful lot of luck involved with some of these, golf tournaments.
And I mean, I think sport in general is like that. The whatever the result is, people then look afterwards and think that it's preordained somehow, and then they look for all the narratives afterwards to fit to whatever the result was. And we never like to admit that there's just a whole bunch of luck factor of whether a putt goes in or whether a drive is behind a tree or whether someone finishes a good chance in a football match or whatever. That just seems to be how it is. We like stories, and then we want to sort of apply the stories. We retrofit them based on the result.
So, would you say there was any player sort of caught your eye over the weekend in terms of sort of stood out for you in terms of good or bad? In terms of over that, obviously great from Rory, but from the chasing pack.
Yeah, there's this bloke called Scheffler that I've got my eye on. People might want to watch out for him. He looks good. Yeah, so Scheffler obviously started off 12 strokes back going into the weekend, which it's a long way back. And it's incredible, really, to think that he's shot 11 under over the weekend. I did actually hear that he's the first, possibly the first player ever to go bogey free over the weekend at Augusta. Certainly since the 1940s. I don't know if they got records for the first few Masters, so they're not sure. But yeah, really like phenomenal golf, and he messed it up with that second round. Putting himself so far back. But I put up after the first round. I just put up on Substack just a little graphic showing that it was actually his best ever driving round at Augusta in that first round, which I think was significant because driving, I think, is really the best sort of marker of how where your swing is. And I know there were question marks about how his ball striking was in his last few events, which is why you got a price as big as 7.4 going into it. Um, he was driving it well, so it's sort of, I thought, immediately allayed those fears that he wasn't striking it well. I thought, okay, look, well, he's striking it well, and we know that everything else is in good shape with his game. So I will say that I quite fancied him, but yeah, that second round just left him too much to do, but not by much. I mean, he only lost by one in the end, and certainly I think if it was a 5 round tournament, I think you'd quite strongly fancy Scheffler to win it going into round five.
Well, you only had to look at his putt on 17, which is, probably less than an inch away from going in. This is what we're talking about. The difference between Scheffler being in a playoff and not, it's probably half an inch. It's just nuts.
It is, and of course, that puts more pressure on Rory as well because, when Rory he did hit a lovely chip on 17, like I said, but 2 shots clear at the time, right? And it's like, well, what if he's 1 shot clear with Scotty Scheffler one back? It's just all these things can maybe put a little bit more pressure on, and so yeah, who knows? But yeah, it's I still I feel like that was still a decent price, I think, for Scotty Scheffler before the tournament.
Okay, so that's an interesting question, I think, is if the tournament took place this Thursday coming, in terms of looking at it from a price perspective, in terms of how, because I think it's interesting when you look back on these events, and there's obviously a little bit of hindsight bias with it, but knowing the information we know now, if they were going into Augusta, is if you'd backed Scheffler, let's say last week at 7.4, I think you could walk away from that tournament thinking you'd actually placed a pretty good bet. I think in terms of the value you got. I don't think if the event started on Thursday, I suspect he would be sub 5 for this event, given how he's played over the weekend. Similarly, Rory would be a shorter price. The likes of Rahm, Bryson would be bigger. What are your thoughts in terms of where Scotty's price would be?
Yeah, there's no doubt you'd be shorter than 7.4. I don't know where exactly you'd be. There's always money sort of holding up the favourites, it seems, in these big major markets, just because I think they've got to get them in the book, and the public they do want to get money on other players. So I don't know how short he would go, but you'd have to think it would be just a couple of points lower at least, just the way he played. And yeah, I think we did touch on some of the other favourites, didn't we? Bryson pretty much was what we were talking about. If you look at his numbers, drove it okay. He obviously hits it so far that he's going to pick up strokes with his driver, but approaches were bad, and I think he had a real horror show around the greens as well. And yeah, I just don't see him as a fit with the Augusta approach shots, the Augusta fiddly chips and stuff. And I think we've got to put it to bed. They had this obsession, didn't they, 3, 4, 5 years ago when he started hitting it far, and they were just saying like, well, I mean, he's just gonna dominate this event. This is like a par 67 for him, or whatever they were saying, and it hasn't worked out like that. There's other players like Rory, for example, that can hit it a long way, but can also play the other shots at Augusta. And yeah, until you see him doing it regularly, then I'm going to struggle to think that he should be going off at 12 to 1, 14 to 1, or whatever he was. Even if he is in good form.
I think Rahm's an interesting one in that obviously, his form's been so consistent on live that when you get a performance like the one he's put in this week, obviously it's very easy for people just to criticise the Live Golf Tour and people come into sort of conversation about Rahm with, a bit of a lazy narrative. Oh, he plays on live. It's no good for him. He can't. He's not playing competitive golf and all these types of things. I think the one thing I did see that would make a little bit of sense is that obviously the courses they're playing on don't really bear any resemblance to Augusta. He has been in a lot of pretty low shootouts in terms of the number of times you see him shoot 6, 7, 8 under in rounds. It is high, and potentially actually playing some tougher golf courses would be much better preparation for him. And I think he subsequently said that himself, that he needs to review how he approaches, this particular major. And yeah, I think it isn't. It's just I do find it interesting when you see him struggle as badly as he did, given he's such a good ball striker. Normally, he doesn't have weaknesses in his game. It's I find it interesting when it's just tough to explain. I suspect is what I'm trying to say when you see a performance like that.
Yeah, and maybe you don't play well sometimes in golf. So I don't think I've really got a big take on Rahm. Just other than he didn't play well this week. He's won the Masters before. He's clearly got the attributes and the type of game that can win there. So yeah, I wouldn't. I still don't really know about the live thing of how well form there translates. I think we can all look at a golfer's recent form on like the PGA Tour, for example, and have an idea of whether someone's playing well or not. When I look at when someone's had a couple of seconds and a first on live, in my mind, I'm still not sure like exactly how good that is. Partly because I've been a little bit out of the golf game in the years when Liv's been most prominent. So that's not really an area that I'm strong in. But Rahm's a fantastic player, and yeah, I'm sure he'll be bang up there, and I wouldn't be surprised if he wins it next year, for example.
I mean, I do wonder how much of it's mental with someone like Rahm. I know he's obviously won Augusta. He's obviously won recently. He's in good form. There does seem to be a lot of pressure from the media ahead of something like this tournament. And I just wonder, because obviously he gets loads of questions about live and things like that. And I do wonder if he's almost trying too hard at times. I wonder, from his perspective, whether it's a more of a mental thing rather than actually a physical playing golf thing. Because he's coming to this tournament in good form. He likes his course.
Yeah, I mean, it could be that. And it could just be some sort of comfort level to do with the live players. Maybe they're just they're coming into an environment where with all the other players, maybe they're just not quite as comfortable. I don't know. But again, it's that temptation to apply a narrative to a result, isn't it? And I mean, I don't know. I would just start from a default that he came in this week and he didn't play as well as he wanted to.
Any other sort of takeaways from the weekend's action in terms of?
Yeah, got a few players that I sort of. I mean, we'll start with Rose, right? Because Rose was probably more than anyone the guy that blew a good chance to win it. And I think what's interesting is I highlighted before the event how his putting stats had been phenomenal at Augusta over the last 5 years. He was averaging plus 1.4 per round, which is really off the charts. And but so this week he actually putted pretty averagely overall. And going into the last round, his ball striking numbers had been fantastic, and you just sort of felt. I still felt like, well, you'll take the 5 years putting stats rather than the sort of the 3 days average. And so if he could just match up that ball striking with the putting, he had a fantastic chance. And it looked that way, didn't it, for 9 holes? And then it was just instant. The moment he took the lead and got in good shape, he just sort of went to pieces.
I think what was really interesting for me was it was around the turn when it was on his. It wasn't with the driver. It was with his approach shots, and I think it started on 10. He suddenly started backing off iron shots, and we hadn't really seen him do that. And it was just like suddenly he was looking uncomfortable with whether it be sight lines, where he was aiming. I don't know. He was unsure about the club. Suddenly there was just a little bit of doubt in his mind. Maybe he was just overthinking things a little bit. Obviously wanted it an awful lot. And you saw him back off, and he ended up hitting a good shot into 10 all said and done. But you saw him do the same again on 11, and on 11, after a great drive, he hit that horrendous second shot. And if I was to pinpoint one shot he would love to have back today, I suspect that it's all going well saying obviously the chip on 12. It's still going to be a difficult chip on 12. I think the one he would love to have back would be the second shot on 11, where he had the lead at the time. And, if you can get through 11, in the lead, you're in great shape. And he was uncertain. And obviously he's bailed out probably 40 yards almost right of where he was aiming. But there was a level of uncertainty with him that we just hadn't seen before. And when people talk about pressure and things like that, these are the sorts of cues I think that give a really good indication as to whether someone's struggling a little bit with it.
Yeah, I mean, there was a few shots, weren't there? He obviously duffed his chip on 12. 13 was kind of interesting because I know he hit what looked like a spectacular approach, but it didn't quite look like the ball flight he was going for, like landing it right next to the pin. And then he three putted it, of course. But yeah, it just seemed very visually obvious with the backing off shots and everything that I think the moment just got to him, and he had such a good ball striking week, and you do feel like that was his chance, right? I mean, he's getting older. I don't think he's going to have another ball striking week like that or Augusta. He may have a week where he really just puts the backside off it again and might sneak home. But yeah, I think it was almost like a Kenny Perry situation where in his mind he was like, well, this is the one, this is my chance, and it was too much.
I think the one thing I would say is I do think players get on a beat themselves up a little bit quickly. I know it's tough around Augusta, but he's ended up a couple of shots back. But you think about the three putt on 13. He had other opportunities to. He could easily have posted a number that Rory could only match. It's almost, I'm not saying he gave up a little bit early, but obviously that 13th hole where he three putted from, so I don't know, 25, 30 feet. It's difficult to know the exact distance on it. It just felt like mentally at that point, coming off the bogeys on 11 and 12, that he was almost done.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I actually looked at the leaderboard yesterday, and 21 players shot lower than Rory in the fourth round. So it is kind of interesting when you think that Rory was tied for the lead with, I think Burns was one back, and then there were a few players in behind. So it's not like Rory was in a commanding position going into round four. And he's shot, what was it, one under in the last round, and 21 players shooting lower. I don't know. I feel like if you were told what the scores were like in round four, and then you're told that Rory shoots one under, I'm not sure you would fancy that he would have won. So it did feel overall like his opponents kind of, I don't want to say handed it to him. He did close it out, but I feel like he didn't have to do as much to win it as perhaps he should have.
But I guess in the history of golf, we've got there'll be plenty of people who look at some of Tiger's wins and will feel a similar way. That the opponents crumbled a little bit. When he was in contention.
Yeah, and well, we were talking about the Chris DeMarco thing, right, in 2005, and he gets into a playoff with Tiger, and they're both 7 shots clear of third place. And it's, again, when you talk about the luck factor, not just individual shots, but just the sort of the spread of a leaderboard in one tournament. And some weeks, let's say Scheffler hadn't messed up that second round, maybe Scheffler finishes on 17 under or something, and no one's even talking about Rory McIlroy, or well, they'd be talking about the way he blew up in the third round, that's for sure. But yeah, I mean, it really is just, it was a week where no one was really exceptional, and Rory, he did just enough and got it done by one shot.
Any other players in terms of sort of stats, numbers?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting when you look at the ball striking numbers this week. So that is strokes gained off the tee plus strokes gained approach. Scotty Scheffler was second in the field. I actually thought he would be first. It was Xander Schauffele, interestingly, who was number one. So he's definitely a player to watch. He had a sort of little bit of a dip after winning those two majors. But he looks like his game is back in a really good place, and he certainly feels like someone that's got a good chance of putting on a green jacket at some point, I would say.
So I think he was Rufus's big tip for the Masters would have been his biggest winner. So I was, I always feel there's no coincidence when you see, something like Rufus picking someone like a Xander, and then him flagging so high in terms of some of the important data.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, I think when he won the Open, he was obviously coming off the PGA win, wasn't he? And I think there was a consensus at the time that he was, I don't know if like the number one guy, was he favorite going into that? He was certainly bang up there in the market. And so, yeah, this week, I mean, he wasn't really quite in that first cluster of favorites, and yeah, maybe he should have been. He's
I
that
think he
caliber of
was.
player, isn't he?
I think he was 17, give or take.
Okay, but yeah,
So
I mean,
literally just behind your Brysons and Rahms and Rorys.
yeah, there was another player I thought was interesting because we were talking about driving distance and how it's not necessarily just a bomber's track. And Russell Henley, he actually had fantastic ball striking numbers on the week, more approaches than off the tee because obviously with his lack of length, he can't quite pick up as many strokes with his tee shots. But he actually missed a lot of putts on the back nine. He was almost a -2 strokes gained putting on the back nine, and he finished what, two back. And so yeah, he actually he was with his where he was leaving the ball with his approaches, did enough to maybe have got into a playoff, and he just couldn't make the putts. And it's he's been a fantastic player. He's one of these sort of players that's incredibly consistent but doesn't seem to quite get the wins, especially in big events, because he doesn't really have the power to overwhelm courses. But yeah, he was just sort of a reminder that it's nice if you can hit it miles like Rory, but you can compete at Augusta just sort of hitting it a moderate way.
Any others catch your eye?
I did notice that Max Homer got into the top 12 again, which is nice to see. He had a 67 in the last round, so that's 3 years in a row. Obviously, if you finish in the top 12 at Augusta, you get to come back the next year. So, interesting career arc he's had, with his early in his career, talented guy, but just his game absolutely went to pieces, and he was playing on sort of local tours and all sorts, and then obviously fought his way back onto the tour and then ended up getting to the world's top 10. And yeah, you just sort of, you feel like he probably felt like, okay, that's it. I've done it now. I'm going to be here for years. And it's a fascinating game. He's lost his game again and can't really get anything going, but he seems to at least be able to figure it out at Augusta.
It's a shame because he always seems like quite a nice guy. I think a lot of people will have listened to a lot of his podcasts during COVID times when, there wasn't a lot of other things to do. But he obviously was peaking sort of during those COVID times, and I think he gave quite a fascinating sort of insight into life as a sort of professional golfer during those times. So it is nice to see him get back and actually play some nice, top quality golf.
Yeah, he does seem like a nice bloke. The other one I noticed was Shane Lowry. I think shot 80 in the last round, and it's becoming a bit of a regular thing, isn't it, with Lowry? I mean, he's got the Open win. No one's going to take that away from him. But you look at his sort of collection of wins down the years, and it doesn't really match the sort of how many times he's been up there, how many chances he's had, his talent level. Certainly in America. I mean, he doesn't seem to be able to get it done in America.
Well, I mean, I've touched on it with James on other podcasts about him, and I always remember at Bridgestone when he won, and WGC event at the time, hadn't done much in America, so he'd obviously won in Ireland as an amateur and those sorts. He'd had success elsewhere, but that was sort of the first big sort of event that he won. and he was so fortunate that week. I just remember, particularly at Firestone, where tree-lined fairways, and they're big trees, they're not easy to go round or even under. It's just a difficult course, and I remember him having all sorts of good fortune. He obviously got the win. He obviously won the Open by a significant margin. Played great that week, lapped the field, but there are definite question marks about him under pressure. I mean, I don't know if you saw the Honda Classic, or what was known as the Honda Classic, maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, where he was in control of that tournament. I can't even remember now quite how many he was clear. It was 3 or 4 clear of our friend Echevarria. And he obviously hit iron off a tee. I think it was 14 into into the water, long way in, and then obviously his another tee shot into the water, and he completely fell apart. And it feels like there is definitely something mental going on there with him, just to collapse in such spectacular fashion. Because the one thing he has is he has a short game. He's pretty solid off the tee, good iron. He doesn't have any obvious weaknesses. And so when you have these sort of spectacular collapses, some of it feels like it has to almost be mental, because he's got a great short game when he wants to. But, that's the beauty of golf.
Yeah. Now, speaking of spectacular collapses, Hao Tong Lee was actually paired with Scotty Scheffler yesterday. And I mean, I think the difference with Hao Tong Lee is, he probably wasn't playing particularly well in the first place to unexpectedly get so high on the leaderboard, and it really came home to roost in the final round. But I think he took a 10 on the 13th hole. So Scotty Scheffler, who's bang in contention, had laid up for his wedge, and he had to wait for ages. I thought on the coverage that they'd messed up, because I thought, well, hang on, we saw Scotty Scheffler's layup about 15 minutes ago, and they just haven't shown his third. And I thought they've just, I don't know, forgotten or something. And then they eventually mentioned that, oh yeah, Hao Tong Lee's been up in the bushes, and then I don't know what happened. He went up in the bushes on the left, and then he ended up getting it up onto the green and then putted it into the water, I think. And yeah, tough scene. I mean, but I think it is just a reminder that it is a brutally hard course. That these guys that we're seeing bang on the leaderboard, they really are the best in the world at the top of their games, and they're able to get around Augusta. But I think if you're, just a mortal or even a professional whose game is slightly off, it can really embarrass you.
Here's one for you, John. Hao Tong Lee, one of his biggest wins was in Dubai. Any idea who he beat?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I
It's
my
relevant. It's relevant. It's relevant to this tournament. There's a reason. There's a reason I asked it.
I don't know. Dubai, was it Rory perhaps?
Rory. So yeah, it's. I think can't remember if he in a playoff or beaten by one, but it was unexpected. Let's put it that way. Um, any other sort of thoughts about the week in general? Any thoughts ahead of next year? Sort of looking forward in terms of things that maybe you'd think differently ahead of next year to how you thought coming into this week.
I think my takeaways are pretty much the same as I thought going in. I love repeat winners at Augusta probably more than anywhere in the world. I think anyone that's won it before is dangerous, and especially given the fact that good players seem to thrive at Augusta, because it does reward, I think, talent. And so you do, at the moment, you have a number of top players in the world that have won at Augusta, which isn't always the case. You've had years where maybe all the previous winners are out of form or whatever. And who knows how the golf landscape will look in 12 months, of course. People think that the same players are going to be good forever, and it doesn't work like that. Scotty Scheffler might be 15th in the world or something. You really don't know with golf. But I think, yeah, repeat winners will always be dangerous. I think probably the one thing that has slightly changed in my mind with Scheffler, for example, where there's the concern over his recent ball striking, and I just think you've got to not be overly worried about a handful of sort of average ball striking performances, especially when he had quite a few weeks off as well. And I think that these top players, they're coming into a major, the first major of the year, and they can really get their game together for that. If you know that there's someone that likes the course and plays well there, then yeah, I wouldn't let it put you off if he's had one or two poor weeks, and especially when the last time he teed it up was at the Players. And I always think Sawgrass is just one of those courses that, yeah, if you have a good week, you have a good week. But if you have a slightly off week, it can end up being like a really bad, like a T40 or a missed cut or something. That's just always been the case at the Players for whatever reason, just the vagaries of that course. And so I definitely wouldn't. I wouldn't let the stats from Sawgrass put you off a player.
One thing for me was it was nice to see Jordan Spieth play pretty well. Nice, see him find. He's shown little glimmers of form recently. It's always the first question my wife has: how's Spieth getting on? And then I get a barrage of questions about whether how many kids he's got now, boys, girls. I don't know him, but all the important things. So I think what's interesting. So obviously this is major number 6 for Rory. He's obviously done the Grand Slam. Where do you think this puts him? So he's now 12th on the list of all-time major winners with 6. So you obviously have Jack with 18, Tiger 15, Hagen 11, Hogan and Player with 9, Tom Watson 8, and then you've got a few on 7. So you had Varden, Jones, Sarasan, Snead and Palmer. But then you're into obviously you've got Faldo, but you've got Mickelson and Rory sat at 6. I mean, it doesn't feel like 6 is an end number necessarily for him. You could easily see him getting up to 7, 8, 9, and it really puts him amongst some pretty elite company.
Yeah, it does, and I think it just shows you, even though it still feels like Rory has underachieved in a sense, because he's got these 6 majors, but he's had so many other good chances. He had the year where he messed his ankle up and missed missed St Andrews, which would have been the perfect course for him, and so there's definitely been ways that he could have won more, but I think it's just when you rattle off the list like that and you realise, yeah, there's not many players that have got more, and of course as he adds each one now, if he gets to 7 or gets to 8, you really get into more and more rarefied air. It is hard to see him not winning another one, just because of how far he hits it more than anything. He's 36 years old, but he's spanking it, 20 yards past a lot of players. And so given the way major courses are, they're going to go to places that are long with thick rough. And if you get a week where it's rained a lot and it's soft, that does take out a lot of the field, So yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would guess what he would end up on. You'd expect probably the over-under is going to be about 8 at the moment, isn't it?
I just think it's interesting because, obviously you have a bit of an outlier in Koepka, given, he's obviously got the 5 majors, having not won that many tournaments in his life. He obviously won a lot of big ones. And it's, he may well win 1 or 2 more, Brooks, but I don't feel like he's going to go and win. I'd be surprised if he returns to the levels he was, because he feels he's not young, should we say. And it feels like he massively overachieved in terms of those performances in the majors, whereas Rory has been knocking on the door consistently. And I think what's interesting with Rory compared to even, say, like a Tiger, it's just he hasn't had that 10 years of peak golf taken away from him out of the game. Rory's had, he's 36, not far off, 17, 18 years at the sort of very top. And who knows how much longer. I guess what will be interesting for Rory is at what point does the strengths he has, such as his driving distance, start diminishing a little bit, and he has to try and adapt his game a little bit more. So I don't always sense his game will translate to being old as well as some, given that I think it is a game based on power. He doesn't necessarily, whilst good around the greens and things like that, he doesn't have quite the same skill set as, say, I don't know, like a Mickelson or even Tiger.
Yeah, that's true. I think what's running in his favor now, he's just rattled off these two Masters. If you think that he had that long stretch after winning four majors, was it like a decade until he got his next one? And so I know that predominantly it was the Masters that was sort of his, his final step of the career Grand Slam and everything. But I just think being on such a long drought major-wise was probably playing on his mind. And so I'd imagine mentally he's in a fantastic spot now, and you do sometimes find that these players rattle off majors in clusters. He did that the first time around, right? He won four in relatively short succession, and so it feels like a window now, doesn't it? Where he's got the confidence, his game's clearly in good enough shape. Yeah, he could maybe win another one pretty soon.
So the interesting question, John, is will he be the best player of his generation? Or was the man who finished second this week, Mr. Scotty Scheffler, who obviously has Grand Slams, four majors, and he's obviously 7 years younger than Rory. It's going to be fascinating to see where their careers sort of go in terms of, if you ask me, will Scheffler win two majors in the next 3 or 4 years? I would say yes. The way he's playing, and he could be out of sight from Rory. But it's going to be interesting to see how those two battle in terms of the for the best player of their generation. Because I think everyone's always, if you listen to Sky Sports, all you ever hear is Rory, 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 Rory. But Scheffler's numbers are, it's only a small period of time relatively. It's not over 15, 20 years. But what Scheffler's done in the last 3 or 4 years has been on a different level to anything Rory sort of produced throughout his career.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one. I hadn't thought of that. Like, who's going to win more majors out of the two of them? And I think the temptation is always to go with the better player, right? Which is Scheffler. And normally, I think I then end up going the other way, where you say, all right, but the majors in the bag is so important, because I think people just they underestimate how hard it is to rack them up, even if you're a top player. Being two ahead is quite significant. But yeah, I feel like Scheffler, just the level he's playing on, it's Rory's never got to that sort of level in terms of just amassing so many wins on an annual basis, and the fact that he looks well suited to Augusta, that always just puts you in with a good shout every year. He's won an Open now as well, so you feel like he'll have a good chance on the links as well. Yeah, I would edge towards Scheffler, but yeah, having those two extra majors in the bank is it is a big lead.
So yeah, Scheffler just missing that US Open for the Grand Slam. I think what is interesting is that I do think there's a lot of sort of credence given to players for winning like a Grand Slam. So obviously Koepka hasn't won, every major, and I feel like he's not given probably not case not as much credit. I think the thing about the Grand Slam is it shows you a very well-rounded golfer in terms of being able to win in very different conditions. It feels inevitable that Scheffler would win a US Open at some stage. His game just feels suited to those types of courses.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, this is probably a conversation for another day, but the sort of definition of majors in golf, I think, is, there's three I think that are clearly majors, and then they decided at some point that they were going to call the PGA a major, and I think we're kind of stuck with that. I don't think they're ever going to be able to change it, but yeah, I think it would be nice if it was a little bit more like tennis, where you had four majors that felt really distinct. Whereas I think, you've got the Open, which is obviously a links in Britain. You've got the US Open, renowned for its sort of really tough courses and thick rough and everything. You've got the Masters with Augusta. That's just a fantastic course. And it'd be nice if there was a fourth that was completely distinct from that, maybe in a different country or something. I know that the PGA Tour, they try to promote the players, don't they, as almost like a fifth major. But you can't start doing that. Well, firstly, you can't start having five majors, because then that just completely changes the context of what everyone has always talked about as majors and how hard they are to win. And also, if you're going to add a fifth major, you can't have yet another one in America. I mean, you've got to, you'd have to have it somewhere else. So, yeah, I mean, it's, I don't know. I think in terms of all-round test, it's like yes, but I would love to see maybe something down in Australia in the Sandbelt or something like that of a completely different test on players' games.
Any other thoughts on the Masters? Or should we call it a day there? And we can
Yeah,
do
that's fine.
other we can do
We
other
can do five,
podcasts.
10 minutes on the football if you like.
You're brave enough. You want to talk about Tottenham, John?
Yeah, if you want to have some fun at my expense, I'll give you a few minutes on Spurs.
2.3 to get relegated looks a big price to me.
Yeah, I mean, it does after this weekend, doesn't it? It's just about as bad a weekend as you could expect. Uh, West Ham winning on Friday pretty emphatically, and they look as though they're playing reasonably well. They were terrible at Villa the game before, which sort of gives you some hope that they'd maybe gone off the boil. But no, I mean they look like for a couple of months now they're playing at a sort of mid-table standard, which is a big improvement from where they were earlier in the season. And then, yeah, you just hope with the managerial change that Spurs might look different at Sunderland, and it was just really the same kind of stuff. They did get a bit of bad luck with the big deflection for the goal. The usual thing with a major injury. I mean, it's unbelievable how it keeps happening. Um, I felt like it was a bit naughty from Brobby with that little push from behind. I don't know why they let players get away with that. The same as when you see players going off the pitch into advertising hoardings, and it's almost accepted that oh yeah you can give them a little nudge, and I mean it's incredibly dangerous when you think of some of the things players get sent off for that they call dangerous play in today's soft game, and then they let things go like that has genuinely caused a serious injury, and Romero was he was in tears, which implies to me that he knows it's bad. But yeah, it's Tottenham's situation is bad as well. And you go into that Brighton game next week. Brighton are playing really well. It's just hard to see Spurs winning it. To be honest with you, I've watched all the games, and I yesterday I kind of felt like Sunderland are pretty poor side. I felt like I could see Spurs winning up there, but right now I'm struggling to see Spurs beating Brighton. But hope is all you've got at this point, I think.
Well, I think that would be the thing you you just hope you get an unexpected result somewhere along the line.
Yeah, basically. I mean, that's when you talk about fine margins and the random things that happen in sport, maybe finally we might get a penalty, which we haven't had all season, and it's just something you need something like that. You need just a little bit of luck.
Well, you do. You need some decisions to go your way. So you need, the other team to have a player sent off, or, you need, as you say, a penalty. I mean, Villa haven't had a penalty either this year. So you do need just a little bit of luck go your way. And when you're conceding deflected goals and things like that, so when you're not having that luck, it just becomes a nightmare, and you just end up losing game after game after game, and the confidence looks shot.
Yeah, and it is interesting when you look at the relegation prices now. So I was talking about how my simulations felt that West Ham were a decent price to get relegated a couple of weeks ago. And so, in spite of these results this weekend, I actually think that has been backed up a little bit by the fact you look at the market now and you look at Spurs' price is based on the results having been as bad as they possibly could be for Spurs. There's still odds against in the relegation market, and I think that shows you that the West Ham price at the time I think was a little bit too big. It was almost like it was factoring in that people were expecting they were going to beat Wolves. They'd almost given them the 3 points, and so I think if you had opposed Spurs at the time, you could get out now for a limited amount of loss. And I said at the time, I think if you want to oppose Spurs, if you think that Spurs are terrible, which I mean, I would not, I wouldn't question that opinion based on having watched the games, but I feel like there's just better value to be had just backing them to lose. Like on like yesterday, there were Sunderland with 2.96. I just think that seems to be better value than backing Spurs to go down at the time, but I haven't run the numbers after these results. I guess I'll see how that comes out.
I mean, we had a conversation before this weekend's games about the prices. So for a lot of the week, both Sunderland and Spurs were about 2.8, and I don't know. I was saying to you that it just didn't seem quite right to me that it was effectively a coin flip that, this Tottenham team who hadn't won in 14, 15 games up against a team who, whilst I don't think Sunderland are great by any stretch of their imagination, but away from home, I don't know, it just felt like the market was giving Tottenham potentially more respect than they actually probably merit at the moment.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. It's such an unusual situation, isn't it? I mean, you're not betting based on how Spurs have been playing. I mean, partly you are, obviously, but the big question mark is, okay, well, a new manager's coming in. You've got this big club in a relegation fight, which it's so rare for one of the big six clubs to be down there. And so, yeah, it's that question, isn't it? Is like, will they just get their act together at some point? Whether a new manager can come in and motivate them, or just put the right players in the right positions. I felt, I felt like Xavi Simons was going to start, or I hoped he was going to start. And I do think it's fascinating that another manager's come in. He's had 10 days in training or whatever. He's watched Xavi Simons, and he didn't come in until the 85th minute. And you look at the team on paper and you watch the game and you think, well, they're crying out for creativity here, for someone that can get on the ball and link play. They've basically got one guy that can do that, and he can't get in the team. And it really doesn't reflect well on Simons. I was hoping that it was just sort of an Igor Tudor problem, but if De Zerbi has come in and gone, yeah, I'm not sure about this guy, it's a bit of a red flag.
I wonder how much of that stuff's, off the ball stuff in terms of, the way De Zerbi wants teams to press. The same with Tudor in theory. I mean, I'm not saying that that's how Tottenham play, but, whether they just deem him to be a luxury potentially that they can't necessarily afford at this time of the season. But, I mean, the simple reality is, I think there was a stat yesterday in your game where you had 3 touches in the box after Sunderland had scored. And I don't know if that was by the end of the game or it was certainly a significant period of time. But if you're not creating chances, you're not going to be, it's pretty simple. You're not going to win many games of football, and you need wins now.
Yeah, I think we had 3 shots after Sunderland went ahead for 0.12 xg or something like that, and even just getting the ball up the pitch. Obviously Spurs by and large have been a good team over the last 20 years, so you really just get conditioned to, like, when you're losing, you're mostly in and around the other team's penalty area, and it's so unusual to be losing a game of football and you can't even get possession of the ball and progress it up to the other end, let alone creating chances. And this has been the whole season, really. I mean, starting with Bournemouth at home in the third game of the season, where Bournemouth went ahead early, and then, yeah, Spurs just couldn't get it up the pitch. That was when the alarm bell started ringing that something was off. But we got a couple of minutes left, and I don't want to finish on a sad note. So can we just talk about the title race for a couple of minutes at the end?
Oh, it's I did the pod with James, the football only one, and as I was saying to him, I find it so difficult with this situation where I know so many Arsenal fans, and I'm a bit torn because I do have a friend who has a massive position on Arsenal, and it's, it'd be the biggest win I know of anyone ever having had on the sports betting front. So obviously I want him to, to have that win. And sort of you're conflicted because it would be vaguely amusing if Arsenal won nothing this year.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned last time that I'd run the numbers, and if Man City won all their remaining games, Arsenal would still win the league a third of the time. That's obviously not the case now. I mean, if this is what the title race needed, was for Arsenal to lose one of these seemingly easy fixtures. I think not only have they lost the game, I mean they were so poor that they created almost nothing from open play. And again, it's a bit like I said with Spurs. Obviously, they're a lot better than Spurs. Don't worry about that. But it's the fact that they needed to score. You know, that they didn't lead at any point during the game, and yet not really being able to create anything. They got a joke of a penalty with one of these stupid modern handball ones. And yeah, that forward line just looks bang average. And you know, I said all year I think Gyökeres has been a really poor buy, but they're going to get away with it because they're still just good enough to win the league. And now that's in doubt. I mean, he could go down as one of the all-time disastrous buys because I think if they had just any sort of moderately good Premier League centre forward, let alone if you know if they actually had a really good one. Imagine if they had Van Persie or someone from back in the day. I mean, they would absolutely romped home in the league. But you know, they're this team with a fantastic defence. You know, all action midfield, good at set pieces, and just bang average forwards. And yeah, it looks like I don't know. It could be game on, but this weekend, I mean, if they go up there and win at Man City, I mean, it still is game over.
I, it's weird. I think mentally they're looking so fragile. You know, Man City get the week off. I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying they obviously don't have. Obviously, they haven't, I know they haven't got Champions League. There's no Premier League midweek. I was just thinking about obviously the game in hand is against Palace. You know, so Man City have got all week to prepare for this. I know where Riley's injured. We'll have to see on Rodri, but you know, Arsenal have got. You know, it should be a relatively straightforward Champions League game against Sporting, but it is an extra game, and you know, City haven't had the luxury of being able to actually prepare for games for seemingly years. You know, Pep will come up with something that I don't think Arteta will particularly enjoy. I think it's going to be really tough for Arsenal to go up there. You know, I suspect Arteta will get super defensive as well.
Yeah, and I mentioned last time, I really feel like Man City are underrated at the moment. And I think this is what we do. We view teams and players sort of through the lens of what we expect of that team or player. And so because Man City have just been sort of out of this world, haven't they, for years under Pep. And so now they sort of have dropped down to being, well, they're just sort of title challengers now instead of sort of win the league by miles. And so I think that people they think that they're worse than they actually are. You know, they're a really good side. They're better than Arsenal now. I think in recent weeks on my ratings it was sort of getting close, but I think that win yesterday for Man City at Chelsea was really impressive. I mean, that's to go to Chelsea, who are a pretty good side, and absolutely play them off the pitch in the second half. If you look at the touches in the box and stuff like that, just absolutely dominant from Man City. I think it was like 64% possession. Touches in the box was like 49-14 or something. It was just really just one side. It just completely outplayed them.
It was interesting because not much happened in that first half. It was almost as if it was a conscious effort from Pep to keep things tight, and then literally half time came and they were so dominant in that first 25 minutes after half time. You know, in terms of I mean, it was so dominant in terms of possession. You know, the chances they were creating. It was just, you know, it was almost like City of previous years. And I think you're right. We do look to previous generations and iterations of the City team who were, you know, so good.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to next week's game anyway. I think it's always nice when you get the sort of two title contenders going head to head near the end of the season with everything on the line. So it was nice of Arsenal to throw in this result just to really ramp up the interest in that game.
Just to give you something, you know, to smile about on a dreadful weekend for Spurs.
Yeah, just a few crumbs for us after the, you know, what might be the worst season ever, certainly in my lifetime. At least we might just get that possible little bonus of Arsenal throwing away a title from an unassailable position.
So, final one to finish on, John, is if I told you at the start of the season the team who finished 17th in the league last year is going to get relegated this year, would you call it one of the all-time big shocks like it's being described that, you know, in the media and amongst fans?
Well, I think the 17th last year is a little bit deceptive. I think what was amazing, I think we had a positive goal difference until literally the final game when we lost home to Brighton. And of course, they were never in a relegation battle last year. They literally, I don't know what's the shortest price they got for relegation last year. It was probably 100 to 1 or something. It wasn't even in question. And so, yeah, I mean, I get it. And there's no doubt that if you look at the arc of where this sort of bad run started, it was probably before Christmas, the season before. And so, yeah, there's no doubt it hasn't just come out of the blue. But yeah, the headline 17th is a little bit deceptive from last year, I think.
I wanted to have a look back and see what the shortest price was matched on Tottenham to win the league this year, but obviously Betfair partially settled the market, so I couldn't see. I was just wondering if there's people out there who backed Tottenham after you had those two early wins, maybe 200-300 to 1 or something, and that would be quite
Well,
interesting to see.
and not just those two league wins, but then there was the UEFA Super Cup, of course, which I mean, it's amazing to think that Spurs should have won that. I mean, they played really well, sort of collapsed at the end, and then lost on penalties against Paris Saint-Germain, and so yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, I wasn't a fan of the Thomas Frank appointment at all, but after that game, and then they beat Burnley at home. Obviously, didn't realise how bad Burnley were at the time, and then had a great win at Man City. That yeah, there's no doubt that you thought, okay, I mean this actually looks reasonably good. And then yeah, Bournemouth game was absolutely horrific, and there was a sign of more to come.
Right, let's wrap it up there then. Thank you as always, and I am sure we will get you back on soon. Talk whether it be golf or gambling or football. And what's your Substack for people to check out?
Yeah, if anyone wants to check me out on Substack, my newsletter is called Unsupervised Football, and I just write about random football stuff, normally with some sort of statistical angle and Premier League reviews and stuff like that. And I think you already mentioned if anyone wants to send in any questions for Luke and myself on golf or betting or football or anything, I'd love to answer some of those. So yeah, it's been fun again, Luke, and thanks for having me on.
Thanks, John.